might get a few more people in as we go, but that's fine. Okay. Before we start, or I guess this can pretty much just be the start of it. Hello, I'm Roy. I've been GVGing for a while. Didn't GVG very much in core, but I've GVG'd throughout HOT, POF, and now obviously EOD. And yeah, I didn't have like a exact structure for this. Like I wasn't exactly sure what we wanted to go over. So obviously, if anyone has any specific questions, or after I finish kind of going over my little spiel, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask away about what I've spoken about. But before we start, has anyone here never GVG'd? Nice. Cool.
Me.
Not since
I've done.
4.
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
I've done some RVR in EOTM, but I wouldn't call it GVG.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. All right, so if people want to type stuff out. Got it. Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah. So the scrim chat in under the discussion section, if you have a question but you don't feel like speaking, you can type it out there and you can at me if you want. Or I'll just try and keep an eye on it. All right. So I'll just quickly give a little bit of an intro to like some GVG specific stuff. But again, obviously most people here have probably GVG'd, but I suppose if someone ends up listening to the recording, then fair enough. So GVG is obviously not an official game mode. It's 100% community driven. There's been some sort of unofficial supports from Arena a little bit, specifically the Edge of the Mist arena in Edge of the Mists, which is probably the current premier location that people GVG in. But overall, it's an unofficial community-driven game mode. Currently, GVGs are 15 versus 15 players. Historically, they have been 20 versus 20, 25 versus 25. Technically, any even-numbered fight, so 30v30, 50v50, could be considered GVG. But for the sake of clarity, we'll say 15 versus 15 is the meta for GVG. Obviously, as I said, since it's community-driven, it's going to be organized between the guilds. There's not like an in-game tool to do so. So you're going to be organizing through discords, such as this one, sort of. There is a main GVG Discord as well that we have set up for both EU and NA. I think there's probably a prompt or like a command or something to find that link somewhere here. But I'm sure if you need it, someone can give it to you if you're not there. Or obviously you can just communicate in game. Generally, communication is going to be between guild leaders, and that's also how rounds for GVGs are organized. The current sort of typical format for GVGs are going to be best of nines if it's an official GVG, and I'll go into the difference between official and non-official in a second. But so that means the first to 5 rounds won. Round is won when one guild basically surrenders by saying GG to the other guild. Again, since it's not an official like in-game sort of game mode, this is all done based on communication, based on guilds speaking to each other. Official GVGs don't really happen outside of tournaments right now, so you're never really going to just stop once you've won 5 rounds for the most part. It's pretty much just you're going to go until you go, or until you stop rather. But again, just for the sake of things, an official GVG is typically a best of 9. Yeah, so that's pretty much just the overall little outline for GVG, and then we can get into the specifics for it. So if you're trying to get into GVG, or you're trying to start GVGing at what I would say like a higher level, a more competitive level, one of the important things to do is actually doesn't really have anything to do with GVG itself, but just having good keybinds is pretty important. And this is obviously something that I would recommend for anyone just playing the game in general, but especially if you're trying to become more competitive at PvP, just playing World vs. World in general, even probably endgame PvE content is going to be pretty relevant. But there's a lot of pretty important keybinds that are, especially for GVG, specifically helpful. First and foremost, I would say you should be turning off camera shake, the double tap to evade or dodge, and auto targeting. And you should be turning on free camera, allow skill retargeting, thick party / squad health bars, and then things that are generally pretty helpful would be skill recharge and target health percent. You should also probably increase your field of view. Generally, I would say to max. Your rotation speed, again, generally to max, but obviously, increase it as you find it comfortable. For casting, I would for ground targeting, I would say fast with range indicator or instant. Instant specifically for some skills such as like the elementalist glyph or the mesmer illusion of life. If you cast it using instant cast, you can then retarget where the effect actually hits. So if someone gets knocked, if a downstate gets knocked, you can actually retarget glyph them or illusion of life them, which is pretty helpful. And then you should absolutely 100% positively have an about face keybind. This is very, very important. And this is actually going to be really helpful for open field, larger scale fights as well, but definitely important in GVG. And you should be using your mouse to turn your camera if you are turning your camera and not your keyboard. And then finally, targeting keybinds are very important for GVG specifically, but just in general, it's a good thing to have. But a large part of the GVG meta for a long time now, and currently, revolves around single target. And one of the biggest things that separates good GVG guilds from not as good GVG guilds is having good single target. And so being able to target properly, being able to take targets is going to be pretty important. So having keybinds is helpful for that, obviously. Some people, some roles, some classes are going to have more of an emphasis on targeting than others. Obviously, you're usually going to have the driver, the leader of the guild, whoever is leading the guild, commanding the guild. Typically they'll be doing the targets. Maybe you'll have one or two other people assisting or taking that over. But it's still important for everybody to be able to target and target efficiently. And then for specifically revealers, so there's a reveal phase after the stealth phase of GG, which obviously, again, I will break it down a little bit. It's important, but for those classes that are revealing, so scrappers and warriors or spellbreakers, and obviously you're not always going to send a warrior out to reveal, but sometimes you will. But scrappers and warriors, it's important to have the template swap keybinds because you will want to have a reveal template, and even for some other classes like scrapper again, or just other classes in general, having a blasting template can be helpful as well. So those are good things to play around with. All right. Any questions about keybinds before we move on? Very cool. All right. So the next thing that's probably pretty important, and this is obviously a bit more specific with GVG, although it is also going to be generally just good for the game. But the next thing that I would say is probably important to know or to get knowledge about, learn about, is obviously builds and comps. So, of course, if you're going to be playing any sort of competitive game, any sort of competitive mode, or not necessarily competitive, but you're trying to improve, you're trying to progress through something. There's going to be a meta. There's going to be a best way or several best ways, I guess, to play. And so you're going to want to have the builds that are generally considered the best, and of course that'll feed into comps that are generally considered the best. Because again, this is a community-driven mode. There isn't any sort of official tool to figure this out, but there are obviously a lot of third-party sites, a lot of unofficial or partnered sites that can help with this. The two that are probably going to be the best to look at for resources for builds and stuff are going to be either metabattle, which is generally going to be sort of more directed at large scale fights, but a lot of the builds translate into GVG very well, or GW2 Mists. Both those sites have at least good starting points for builds, and are going to be pretty good resources for those.
There's
And then
actually
comps.
there's a GVG section on metabattle.
There's a GVG section of metabattle, even better. Look at that. Thank you, Arent, our resident metabattle admin. Yeah, okay. So then metabattle is a great resource, even better. But yeah, so typically you're going to want to obviously understand your role. There are several different roles in GVG. And of course, your build is going to dictate, well, your build and your spec is going to dictate the role you're playing. And it's also just helpful, of course. Again, this is going to be kind of just general stuff, but it's going to be helpful to understand the roles and the builds of other specs. So not just the ones you're playing, but everything that's in the current metagame. That's always just a good thing to do to be better. And then also just how comps work. So for anyone who doesn't know, boon priority or just party priority is a thing in Guild Wars 2. Most things are going to be limited to affecting 5 players, 5 targets at most. And so that's why generally you're going to see in squads parties of 5. You really shouldn't see parties of more than 5. Obviously, if you're not playing an even numbered fight, then you might see parties of less than 5. But for 15s for GVG, you should see 3 parties of 5. And so a standard party setup, and of course because the meta shifts, of course because there's not right now. I would say the current meta for GVG is a little bit more diverse, a little bit more flexible. There isn't one single comp that's always going to be better than everything else. So there is a little bit of flex potential. So this isn't going to be the end all be all, but generally I would say a pretty good right now format would be 1 firebrand in each party, so it's 3 firebrands, 2 scrappers, again in separate parties, and a tempest. And so that's going to be your main supports and your main cleanse supports. That's going to be the bulk of your healing. Most of that isn't really interchangeable right now. Obviously, you need a guardian, a source of stability in each party. You're gonna want to have a good, strong cleanse source in each party. You could technically drop the Tempest for a third Scrapper, and that does have some strengths, but Tempest has a lot of really strong utility that Scrapper doesn't have, and it also has one of, if not the strongest res utilities in the game. So it's very good to take. And then you're going to fill the rest of your comp out. So that's obviously 6 out of 15. So the rest of your 9 specs out generally with either utility or DPS spots. And so one of the strongest utility specs, this isn't really a true DPS or true support, I would say, are Renegades. Renegades bring Alacrity. They're probably the best source of Alacrity right now, coupled with some of the strongest, if not the strongest, boon strips in the game. You're usually going to pick between 1 or 3 of those. So 1 per party if you're taking 3. Usually, if you're only taking 1, you're going to want to put it in the driver party, since they'll be the one single targeting. And you're usually going to want to put that with your Necros, just to line up their will cooldowns. If you're taking 2, then again, 1 in the driver party, 1 in the other party, usually with the Warriors. But you're usually not ever going to take more than 3. You just don't really have room for it in the comp, and you're also going to want to have at least 1. And then again, you're going to take usually between 1 or 3 Necros. Typically, you're going to see people bringing 2 Necros right now. Necros are DPS spec, but they're also, they are the only real source of corruptions, the best source of corruptions, and they're going to also have a lot of really strong, depending on the spec a little bit, but generally a really strong AoE spike, which is one of the biggest cooldowns, one of the most played around cooldowns for a group. And then Spellbreaker, again, talking about played around cooldowns, Spellbreakers, Warriors are going to be bringing Winds of Disenchantment. Again, you're going to be taking around 1 or 3 of them. Typically, you'll probably see 2 played. You do have room to bring 1, you do have room to bring 3. And then you'd fill out the last several spots. You should bring a Daredevil, Thief, as a DPS role, but also for Smoke at the start of the round. You should probably, you absolutely should be bringing a Chrono, because that has also one of the strongest res utilities in the game, Illusion of Life. It also has some of the best CC in the game, and it also has some extremely strong scripts in the game. And then finally, Soul Beast is a pretty good option to bring. It has probably the best MOB source in the game currently for GVG, and it also does a fair bit of damage. So that's kind of like a general outline. But generally, when you're building a comp, again, you want to make sure you have a Guardian per party. You should probably have a second support per party, specifically a cleanse support. And then you want to think about how many wins do I want to be playing around with? How many do I really want to be playing a lot of melee uptime? So again, Warriors, Reapers, Thief, Soul Beast, those sort of melee DPS. Am I going to try and play any sort of, do I want any range pressure? Which generally I would say you don't for GVG. It just doesn't work as well. It's not as efficient. It's not as effective. But if you did, you could be trying to bring things like Hammer Herald, which used to be meta, not as meta as anymore, really. Do you want to try to play around Shade cooldowns? Would you bring Scourge over Reaper? Do you want to have that strong source of immobilize from Soul Beast, or would you rather bring more of a true DPS like Dragon Hunter is a decent option, or just another Warrior, another Renegade for more strips, for more alacrity? That's where you kind of have that flex potential with comps. And I really do want to underline builds and comps, having proper builds, having a proper understanding of comps, having your comps properly set up is very important to GVG. Obviously, you just, successfully completing mechanics, successfully, just understanding the GVG sort of metagame, and obviously playing properly is going to be really important. But you will lose. Like if you have 2 even guilds and one just has a better comp and builds, the guild with the better comp and builds will just win. And even if you have a guild that might be slightly better, they can definitely lose to guilds that are just running a superior comp and superior builds. So it is really important to be able to understand that. Theory crafting is a really big part of GVG. It's sort of one of the things that makes GVG a unique game mode within Guild Wars 2. And of course, World versus World has, a similar, larger scale World versus World, I should say, has a very similar sort of theme to it. But theory crafting is going to be really important. And so that is a pretty good thing to understand when you're getting into GVG. And if, again, you're trying to be more competitive in GVG. Any questions about builds and theory crafting and comps and whatnot?
What class should the commander be?
That's a very good question. So I would say usually, well, first of all, the classes you're going to see people leading on more than anything is Firebrand. Sometimes you're going to see Chrono. Technically, the leader could be any class. There's not necessarily a direct requirement to have it on one of those two. The reason you're typically going to see it on one of those two classes is Chrono. It's obviously really easy to survive on, especially if you're used to playing Chrono. And also, Chrono doesn't have a lot of, I guess I would say, consistent responsibilities in the sense that you have several really, really strong responsibilities. You have several really, really important key skills to be pressing, but you're not a DPS spec. So, playing really, really well at a really high level isn't as important. If you're hitting your grab wells consistently, if you're hitting your illusions of life consistently, if you're getting good strips out. But with a DPS, if you're not really paying attention to your gameplay, which you're just not going to play at as strong of a level if you're leading because you're focusing on leading, it's not as efficient. And on top of that, you obviously don't want to be dying as a leader. If you die, if you int, if you are generally taking more pressure as the driver, it's going to affect obviously how you lead. It's going to affect how your guild plays. And if you die, then they don't have anyone to lead you. So playing a squishier target, playing something that isn't as basically tanky as it possibly could be, is going to be less effective just in general. So that's why you'll usually see Firebrand or Chrono. Additionally, there's other supports. So there's Tempest and Scrapper are going to be the two main supports. Sort of the two other, you could say, tanky specs. But Scrappers shouldn't, the Scrappers have to go out to reveal. So obviously, you don't want to be leading on a class that has to run away from the entire group at the start of the round. And Tempests also, I would say, just because of how you want to play Tempest, it's not as good of a class to lead on. Because of how you want to be moving around the group, because of how important glyphing, especially at the start of a round, is. You don't really want to have to focus on that while you're leading. And it's also a little bit easier to get killed on Tempest, I would say, just because you don't have the access to stun breaks that you do on Firebrand. Which, of course, similar to Chrono, you don't have, really a lot of access to stun breaks in the meta build, although if you're leading on it, you can probably take the stun break mantra or something. But generally, I would suggest Firebrand and Chrono. And so the very long-winded answer to your very simple question is Firebrand is probably what I would recommend. If you're really comfortable at playing Chrono, if you're not worried about missing illusions or Gravwells, then I think Chrono's fine. But I would say one of those two specs is the best for leading on.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. Anything else about builds and comps and theory crafting?
I just wanted to ask a little bit more about metabattle.
Metabattle, like that one.
Is it? You mentioned like Arete. Does Arete does he make the builds on metabattle, or is it other people? Like how?
So technically,
built are you?
anyone in the community can submit things. Realistically, I've made every build there.
Okay, so they're good then. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Assuming
took
you think you're
over-
right is good, yeah.
I took over adminning just before EOD came out. So it definitely had some quality problems in the past. I do not believe it has any anymore.
I would certainly recommend Metabattle. If I didn't think the builds there were good, I wouldn't. I think it's a pretty good resource. Again, I think there's other resources available, and it's always good to compare. I think that's probably if you're not really familiar with the metagame, if you've never played it before or you're trying a different class, I think it is a good idea to just look at what builds are on different sites, because maybe one thing has a radically different choice, and it's just good to think about why it would have that choice. Of course, it could also be completely wrong, so you do have to be careful when you do that. And in general, I would definitely recommend Metabattle as being pretty solid of a resource. So yeah. Anything else? All right. So I want to kind of break down how a typical role would probably look, and then we'll also probably talk about leading a little bit, although this is GVG basic, so it's not really getting into leading specifically. And I think that's probably good, and then we can just open up the floor to just general questions if people want. But yeah, so general rounds. So like I said before, you're gonna have the two people communicating from each guild, or one person from each guild, two people total. And you're going to agree on a time to start the round. So obviously, when you're in World versus World, you have a timer at the top of your screen, counts down from 5 minutes, and then when it hits 0, goes back to 5 minutes. And so that's usually the timer, excuse me, that's going to be used to determine the beginning of a round. So let's just say, for the sake of this, the round timer, or the round start, is going to be 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So each guild is going to be at their starting point in the arena, and I did forget to mention the arenas, but we'll get back to that in a second. But you're going to be at your starting point in arena, usually around 5 seconds before the round starts. So in this case, it would be 4:35. You're going to start the stealth phase, and what this is each group will stealth up. Usually, this means your thief, if you have one, which again, generally I would recommend you do, will drop black powder. If you have a soul beast, you can also drop a smoke field with that. If you have, you have scrappers, they can also drop bomb kits, and then you will blast the smoke. For anyone who doesn't know, each smoke field, or any combo field, can have up to 5 interactions, 5 finishers in it, or excuse me, I'm sorry, 5 different people interacting with it. Technically, you can have an unlimited amount of finishers, but only from those 5 people. And so you're going to have a specific group of people blasting stealth. So you don't want to just let every single player blast stealth. You don't want to let every single player just willy-nilly use all their cooldown, all their interactions with it, because you will end up messing up stealth that way. Some people won't get it. And the stealth phase is pretty important in GVG. A lot of guilds who are just better at stealthing and revealing will have a distinct advantage due to this. And so you will see sometimes some groups, especially if they're newer to GVG, prefer to try and GVG without stealth just to learn the rest of the GVG sort of metagame, which obviously is fine. But stealth is a pretty integral part of the metagame for GVG at certainly the top level. So anyways, after you stealth, once the timer hits 4:30, the guilds will each move out into the arena. Most guilds will have specific spots they like to move to while in stealth before they drop stealth, and these are kind of known as reveal spots. And so, as I mentioned before, you're usually going to have scrappers and sometimes spellbreakers, warriors moving out to reveal. And again, this is where you have the templates sort of come into play. If you're one of those reveal classes, you're usually going to have a reveal template, and then the template that you swap to after revealing that you actually play with during the round. The reason for this is obviously, you don't want to have that reveal skill on your bar usually during the round, and so if you're able to swap off after revealing, or, well, maybe not revealing, but using the reveal skill, then you just have an extra utility to use during the round. You're usually also going to have some sort of invulnerability on your bar, so Endure Pain for Warriors, Elixir Rest for Scrappers. So that way, if you are very far away from your group, and you get revealed by the enemy group, or you come out of stealth on top of them or something, and they try to kill you, you have a good escape to get out. But again, you'll send your revealers out. They either will reveal the enemy group or they won't. Groups will reconverge with each other, and then depending on where the groups come out of stealth, depending on where they get revealed, they will engage with each other or potentially go for a re-stealth. Either way, whatever happens, groups will engage with each other. Typically, you're going to see groups open up with Winds of Disenchantment from at least one Spellbreaker. It's just kind of the most standard opening in the game right now. And you're going to try to combo that with CCs, Immobilize. You're probably not going to use Wells right away. It's a cooldown you typically want to try to play around after you use your Winds, just because then cooldowns will have been already taken from the enemy group. Defensive cooldowns, that is. So usually groups will run through each other, basically, like 2 ships passing in the night. Winds gets dropped, groups turn around, they go back into each other, and then you continue on through the round until enough players have been killed from one group, and that group calls GG. But one of the important things, like I mentioned before, is single target. So the 2 big things you're doing during a round is you're playing around single target, and you're playing around the cooldowns you have, offensive cooldowns you have. And that's really important, because if you try and if you successfully play around your offensive cooldowns, so the big ones again are going to be, if you're running not Scourge, are going to be just your Necro Wells and your Winds of Disenchantment. Or if you are running Scourges, then you can play around Shades, you can play around Breach a bit. But playing around those offensive cooldowns, coordinating them with your team, trying, going really aggressive when you have those cooldowns, using them effectively, generating down states with those cooldowns and pressuring off of that is going to be really integral. Keeping a consistent single target, just because that helps. If you have 15 people hitting the same target, it's better than 15 players hitting 15 different targets, or 5 different targets even. And so playing around single target is going to be really important because you're generating consistent pressure. Usually you should be generating consistent down state. And that will dictate how you're moving. So obviously, if you have wells, pushing in with wells makes sense. You can push in, you can get aggressive, you can get high melee uptime. If you don't have any cooldowns, if you don't have winds, if you don't have wells, you're generally not going to be pushing in as much. Or depending on what cooldowns the enemy group has, you might still try to get into melee uptime, especially depending on your comp. But you still have to just consider the cooldowns they have, the cooldowns you have, and that will dictate when you pull in, pull out of a spike. But like I said, usually you're going to have the round start, you're going to have the stealth and reveal phase, you're going to have the initial clash. Again, usually both groups will pass each other with wins, try to catch players, try to catch a single target, opening up on a single target, even with wins. And then you'll sort of reset, you'll disengage from the group, and then you'll re-engage again, probably with your second wins if you're running a double warrior, or potentially even third, and wells. And then you will be, again, disengaging, re-engaging, disengaging, re-engaging until one group calls GG. And that is generally what I would say is how a typical round will probably go. Any questions about that? All right. So I did mention the arenas, and I'll just quickly sort of backtrack because I forgot to mention them. The arena that's most usually played in right now is the Edge of the Mist arena, and that was added a couple years ago. The reason that you're going to use that one the most is because it doesn't matter. Obviously, it's still region split, EU and A, but it doesn't matter which server you're on. And so you can anyone from any server can jump into the arena by selecting a team color, a flag, only added last year. Well, the flags were added last year. The arena was added before that. But you can take a flag, so a team color, red or blue, and then you're just on that team. Doesn't matter what server you're on. And so obviously that's the most efficient or the most accessible way to play GVG, because again, you could have a group of 15 players on 15 different servers and still play with them. The other sort of main arena that you're going to use is Obsidian Sanctum. That's going to be matchup locked, and so you obviously can only play with people who are in your matchup in that arena. You do have a couple other spots, but they're not really typically used. One of the other sort of common spots, though, is the Edge of the Mist mid spot, which is north of the Inferno's Needle Tower. The issue with that is that it's not in the arena, meaning that you can't be on any server. You have to be on the same color. Underneath Firekeep, that's GVG spot. Yeah, not so much. But that's obviously just where you're typically going to be GVGing, and most of the GVGs are going to be in the arena, and pretty much all the tournaments since that arena got added and moving forward are going to be in that arena as well. But it's just good to know. I could talk a little bit about driving, although, again, this isn't really a driver-specific discussion, and I'd probably want to look at footage to do that. But obviously, if anyone has any questions about that, then they're welcome to ask. But does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about or about GVG in general that I maybe didn't talk about?
It might be worth mentioning why guild halls are not used.
Sure. So when HOT came out, Heart of Thorns, guild halls were added. And obviously a guild hall would be a pretty convenient way to GVG. You could have anyone, again, from any server. It's a private instance. It's a literal arena. But one of the issues, obviously, was the size of the arena was a little bit bad, but that can be worked around. The problem that cannot be worked around is that the guild hall uses the PvE balance set, which is vastly different from World vs. World, the World vs. World balance set, which Edge of the Mist and Obsidian Sanctum use. And obviously, since GVG is a subset of World vs. World, you're going to want to play with World vs. World balance. And so if you GVG'd in guild hall, you would be GVGing with essentially a different meta or a different comp, and different builds, probably. And so it wouldn't be the same. Technically, you could GVG in Guildhall. It just would be again, different meta than GVG in World vs. World.
A question about bomb stealth from earlier.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to confirm because I've heard a lot of people say it both ways. You said that smoke fields or all fields can be interacted with as many times. It's limited to 5 players who interact
Right.
with it, but they can interact with it as much as they want. It's not 5 interactions. Yeah.
Stealth does have a max duration, so obviously if you had 5 players blasting 20 times each, there wouldn't be a point. But yes, if you have one combo field, up to 5 players, unique players, can interact with that combo field as many times as they want.
So if somebody was having trouble getting a good bomb stealth going, and the fields were going at the same time, the problem would be the timing of the blast and not overblasting, right?
It could be one. It could be one or the other. It could be if it wouldn't really be the timing of the blasts. If the fields are going down at the same time, unless people are blasting when the fields aren't there, then it's not really timing the blasts.
Excuse me, you're right. Either the timing or the fields.
Right.
I hear the phrase overblasting thrown around, and that.
So overblasting is when you have more than 5 people interacting with a stealth field. There's two important things to note about that. So if like you mentioned, if the smoke fields don't go down at the same time, then you could have someone blasting one field and then the second field will come down, they blast the second field. And so that's one person interacting with 2 fields, which you don't want. The other thing that can happen as well is one of the main smoke fields, like I mentioned, is that Thief Pistol 5 black powder. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, consistently enough that you should consider it basically a player interaction. The Thief, when they drop that, will actually interact with the field themselves. And so what that means is that Thief is dropping the smoke field, but only 4 other people could interact with it. And so that is also something that can mess you up. The other main thing that's important as well is because, like I said, stealth will max out. You want to have a minimum number of blasts per party. Again, you want to make sure you're not going past. Technically, it would be 15 players, right? Because if you have 3 smoke fields, it'd be 15 technically. You want to make sure you're not going past that number. But you want to make sure you have enough blasts per party. So, like, usually you might say Firebrand blast 3 times, Scrapper blast 4 times, and then you could have, like, let's say we have a Renegade in that party. Wouldn't need to blast, could blast if we wanted to. Second party, again, Firebrand 3 times, Scrapper 4 times. One of the warriors in that party, if you had a warrior, could blast. Again, doesn't need to. Third party, Tempest blasts 4 or 5 times, Firebrand blasts 3 times. That's enough for that party, but again, you could have not the Chrono. I mean, you don't really need to roll blast, but you could technically have the Thief or the Soul-based blast once, and that would be enough.
Appreciate it.
For the stealth blasting thing, I do want to mention 2 like issues that I've had in the past with it, and Expand has helped me with it, where I would always smoke blast a little bit too early, and that would actually lead to a disadvantage because of stealth was coming out early in the round. I would like start calling for blast around like 8 seconds, and then we would come out of stealth much earlier. And then Panda just told me the sweet spot was put the smoke fields down at 5 and then start blasting at 4, and that really helped out. As well as just if you give your scrappers quickness to place their bomb kit, the smoke fields will come out faster, and it'll be way less likely that people blast early.
Yeah, Sunny is a little quiet. You can turn him off if you want, but yeah, that's absolutely right. And like I said, so the stealth phase and the reveal phase is a fairly large part of the metagame. And there are ways to get better at it. There's ways to get worse at it. There could be a difference between guilds if you're better at it or worse at it. It's one of the things that you need to work at and grind out and get better at. And so yeah, literally blasting a second earlier in the enemy group or a second later in the enemy group can make a difference in that stealth phase. Yeah, generally I would say if you're aiming for about 5 seconds before round starts, that's a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I was asking to kind of confirm the idea that if you have 3 fields for 15 players, you can't be like quote-unquote overblasting. It's some kind of timing issue because of the way field interactions work.
what people might mean is that you're overblasting because you're overblasting like the first field. Like if your first field goes down 2 seconds early, and like 7 people try and blast that one, you could overblast that field.
Yeah. But the idea that is, at its core, a timing issue, not
Yes.
perfect. Thank you.
There's like one other thing that it could be where it's like you only use the 2 thief powders, which you're probably never going to do now with Scrapper being meta, but when you were only using 2 thief powders, you could overblast by not counting the thief's combo interaction from Pistol 5.
Yeah. But if you have each Scrapper drop a bomb field, or smoke field, and then the Thief drop 1, that's 3 smoke fields, and you should be fine. Because that's technically 14 people that can interact with the field. Or potentially 15, but again, to be safe, 14.
Might be worth noting. It's pretty good if you can drop an extra smoke field too, just in case someone messes up.
Yeah,
You know,
if you're
with
running
the stealth advantage, yeah.
If you're running a Soul Beast, there's no reason not to just drop 4 smoke fields as well.
Yeah.
And then literally everyone can go crazy. But yeah. You can get your Bone Minion blast on your Necros.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I will also just mention that, in my opinion, driving is probably the hardest part of GVGing. It's the skill that needs to be grinded up the most. It can also be it can cause a very distinct difference between guilds. And so if you have a guild that has a really, really strong driver and a guild that has a bit of a weaker driver, more inexperienced, that is going to be a pretty big difference. You can't always just get carried if you have like a ton of really, really strong players. And so driving is a very, very large part of the GVG metagame. It's very different than any other sort of part of playing Guild Wars 2. And so understanding how that works and getting good at that is also going to be something that's important to sort of, if you're interested in driving, to get good at. And not even if you're trying to drive yourself, but if you're just a member of a guild or a member of a GVG guild, GVG group, and you're trying to get better as a group, you helping to get your driver to be better is obviously going to be important for you as a player as well. Driving is command, yeah.
I do want to bring up that Dracora brought up a good point for sometimes a issue can go wrong if the Scrappers template swap too soon and they don't complete the casting of their smoke bomb, and then the smoke field won't go out.
Yeah, and something else that's probably important to note as well is with your template swapping, all the traits have to be the exact same across all templates. If you have any traits that are different across templates, then you will come out of stealth. Yeah, by putting yourself. All right. Anything else? Any other questions from anybody? No, cool. I think that's honestly probably it. I would recommend, if you are interested in trying to get into GVG, or you're trying to get better at GVG, or you're trying as a guild or a group to improve. Again, one of the things that sort of really, I would say, limits GVG generally as a game mode is, again, because it's community driven and there aren't a lot of like really strict resources for it. It's hard to learn. It's very, very hard to learn. And for a really long time, there wasn't even as strong of a community sense, so it was even harder to learn, I would say. But utilizing any resources you do have. So again, the build websites that we mentioned before. Obviously, things like this Discord, the GVG Discord, are going to be really important. But trying to reach out and talk to players from guilds who are pretty competitive, pretty experienced at GVG, getting them to look at your footage review is one of the most important and impactful ways to improve in GVG, potentially the best way to improve in GVG, or really in anything, but obviously GVG specifically now. And so it's important to do that if you do have that ability, if you do have that opportunity. It's good to do so. But it's just important to mention that you want to try and utilize any resources you can, but you're gonna have to do some work yourself. It's not anything that's gonna be in game, that's gonna be thrown at you, that's gonna be just given to you. You do have to kind of go out of your way a little bit to learn it. And obviously, since you guys are here, you're doing that. But yeah.
Do you have any any footage you can go through? Because I think like going through the phases of GVG as you described before, like with a visual aid, might help out a lot.
Yeah. We could take a look at a round, I suppose. Let's see.
Can you walk us through like the first 30 seconds, which are like the most important?
Yeah. Absolutely. Quality is going to be a little bit scuffed because my recording quality is kind of scuffed.
Don't worry, I feel your pain.
Yeah. All right. This is also a lot of people watching this, so I don't know if that's going to change how it looks or not. But
I think it is also worth noting that recording gameplay is one of the best ways to improve.
yeah, like I said, footage reviewing is probably the best way to improve, and of course, you have to record gameplay to be able to footage review. So a couple things that are probably important to note here. As you can see from the squad comp, we were playing with a blade sword. I didn't mention blade sword before. I wouldn't consider it meta. This was something we were trying in place of a soul beast, so a MOB application basically. Not saying you can't play blade sword if you want to, obviously you can, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it meta. The other thing that's probably important to mention here is, I believe, this was recorded at a point where winds had not been changed yet, so winds still prevented you from applying boons in the winds, and that is obviously didn't necessarily shift the meta, but it does a little bit shift how you play. Probably wouldn't really change anything with this gameplay specifically, but it is just a good thing to mention in general. Yeah. So anyway, so here you can see this is the stealth phase. So the time, if you look at the top of it's at 134. We're just dropping smokes. So the time that the round starts, we're going to assume is 1:30. So smokes go down, we blast. You can obviously tell we are a little bit later than the time that we previously mentioned. But we're just right behind, like, about a half a second to a second behind that 5 seconds prior that we were mentioning. Blasts come out. We've decided on where we're going beforehand. This is something that I communicated to the group. The location we moved to, again, one of those reveal spots. And you can see the scrappers leaping out as well as we move. So the group moves to one of the spots as I weapon swap. So this is where we've grouped up, or we're going to be regrouping. These are the scrappers going out. Again, the quality is terrible, but yada yada. So they're going to be looking for reveals on the enemy group. We wait. So this is the reveal phase. You wait for one of the groups to get revealed or not to get revealed, which it looks like is happening here. Now you do have two options here. Like I think I mentioned, but you do have two options here. You can either try to re-stealth, which is generally a pretty good option, or you can just move out into the arena, which obviously is a bit of a risk, because if you move out of into the arena and the enemy group re-stealths and you don't have time to reveal them or engage, you're putting yourself at a distinct disadvantage. You can make it an even engage if you are, or potentially a positive engage if you just reveal a single player using something like Sikkim on Ranger or on my mark on Warrior, or potentially F1 on DH. And then you get a really free single target if that happens. But you also, again, like I said, it's a bit of a risk reward type situation. Re-stealthing while you're still in stealth is a really safe scenario. There's two ways to do this. The first one would be using a sneak gyro, which I don't recommend because you want sneak gyro for mid-round re-stealth for single targets. And the better way to do it would be to have just the thief drop a smoke field and then guardians just like blast with staff 2. And like anyone else who has like a really easy, convenient blast on their board that you don't have to swap templates, you don't have to swap weapons for, you can blast this smoke field. The idea there is just to get another second or two of stealth. It's not to have long form stealth or long duration stealth. It's just to get another second or two to try to have again, a second or two more stealth in the enemy group. But you can see the scrappers are going to start coming back to us because they didn't get the reveals. My stealth is timing out, so we're going to be coming out of stealth. They re-stealth, as I mentioned. So because they re-stealth and we don't re-stealth, I move away from them from where I saw them re-stealth. So we go to the other side of the arena. They're going to be chasing us again. They only got a second or two, but they will obviously have somewhat of an advantage here. Activate windows. Don't know what you're talking about. And then you're going to see me start looking for a single target here if I'm good at the game, which clearly I'm not. But again, as soon as we clash, and because again, they had a better engage than us because they had stealth, you see one of our players die because they're single targeting and they have a much easier time to single target here than we do. And as they move in, as they single target, They drop wins, we drop wins. So again, we engage, we clash, wins comes down. Oh, they actually don't drop wins. One of our players, their single target dies. Our single target obviously doesn't because again, they got a better engage. I get a signet out. I probably cuck my Ellie. And now wins comes down. So from them, so they moved out after engaging and trying to get the single target, and then they move into us with wins. And so that's like a pretty typical engage, even if you don't drop wins right away. Obviously, they had to move out because we dropped wins, but you're still going to usually be moving past each other. And then they drop wins. They chain a second wins here, so we can just continue moving. We come out. Usually, you're going to try to regroup after that first engage. We get a pretty defensive wins out here. We'll call it a defensive wins. And then they move through us to try and again push into our single target. Push in. You can see their wells are on the ground. They're pushing into their wells. We decide to just stay on this single target that pushes in, and we generate down states. We probably dropped our wells. I think you can see them here. Obviously, don't have comms on, so we can't hear called. And then at this point, both groups have used other wins. Both groups have used their wells. Neither group is running Scourge, so you don't have to worry about breaches. You don't have to worry about shades. And so what happens a lot of the time here is the group that has better single target, the group that has better group movement is going to win. Because if you have better group movement, if you're moving in and out as a group better, if you're able to get better melee uptime, assuming that you're running melee heavy uptime classes, so like warriors, reapers, thief. Bladesworn again isn't really a meta DPS, but you can call it one here, or Soul Beast or DH, things like that. Well, not DH as much, but it can have good melee uptime as well. So groups that have better group movement and can generate better melee uptime that's going to be an advantage. Groups that have better single target are going to be an advantage because you're just single targeting better and generating more pressure on the single target, getting more kills and more efficient kills with single target. Obviously, you're going to have an advantage here. And res utility, which I didn't really mention as much, but having really good res utility. The main res utilities are going to be Signet of Mercy on Guardian, Glyph of Renewal on Elementalist, and Illusion of Life on Mesmer, Chrono. You see a battle standard here again. That's because we're running a Bladesworn. Not going to be usually meta. Sometimes you might see like a really warrior heavy comp, and some of the warriors will run battle standard, but again, that's not typical. So you're usually not going to see that. Scrapper is technically a function gyro, but that's not really res utility. So those are really going to be the main res utilities. And res utility will also, like I said, with single targeting, like I said with driving, like I said with stealth phasing, that will separate good groups from bad groups or better groups from worse groups. Really good res utility wins and loses rounds, or well, I should say wins rounds. Bad res utility loses rounds. And so having good consistent res utility is very important, and playing around it as well. But as you can see, we stay on the single target. We just continue to try and generate pressure, generate downs on top of the group here. They again use res utility. We lose players as we're just sitting on top of them. We get the reses coming out again, just moving in, trying to continue to keep pressure on the single target. And this again, when you don't have specific offensive cooldowns to play around, a lot of it just kind of looks like you're moving in and out of the enemy group, moving towards enemy group, moving towards single target, moving away to disengage, whatever, chasing down states, etc. Because again, you're not playing around those specific cooldowns. And Wells probably comes up a second time here, I would say. So you probably will see us playing around Wells a second time here, unless the round ends right now. But I would assume Wells probably comes down around now or something. And so again, that's why it's important to have those cooldowns to play around and communicate with your team. And so when Wells are coming up. But again, initial stealth phase, you stealth, people move out for reveals, no reveals happen, they re-stealth, we move away, engage happens with wins, we move out of the wins, Wells gets used, we probably drop our own Wells, and then the rest of the round is single targeting and trying to just create more pressure and not get pressured and having better res utility. And so this is where obviously the res utility comes into play. At this point, when we have, I think, 4 people in downstate, but they get illusion / signeted / glyphed back up or rallied potentially. I don't think there's a kill here, but yeah, or battle standard in this case. But yeah, any questions about that?
I think it's important to say that Roy RQM at this time or the best guild in NA. So
okay, we don't need to say that.
I'm
That's
just,
not
just
important
for all the newer people to say that you don't have to get everything perfect and perfectly right. They can get it all perfectly right, and that's why they're so strong of a guild.
This
But
also wasn't Requiem. This was
I
inhouses.
think this is
but-
RV scrims, but
Yeah, this is RV inhouses.
Okay, all right.
Is it
I see you're
Blasphemy?
repping
but,
Requiem, and I'm
but they do
jealous.
look like RQM. I get what you're saying.
I
so-
am repping RQM.
That
so
is
fair.
Borp,
Repping
actually,
RV.
when you think about it.
Yeah, it is Borps. Obviously, Sonny's point is true about you obviously don't need to get everything perfect at the start. Yes, I purposely picked a round where it didn't look that bad from our point of view. I could show you a plethora of rounds where we just get ran down because there's a difference there as well. But yes, obviously, I would say GVG is literally a skill you have to grind out. Like I said before, with any game or process where you're competing or you're just trying to improve, whether that's against other people or computers or whatever, you have to grind it out. You have to do things to try and improve and to get better, and that takes time. And GVG is just like anything else that takes time to get better at. So good point that Sonny mentioned. Well, the moral of the story was good.
Yeah, and especially for the North American server, there's only just a couple guilds that GVG frequently, semi-frequently. So if you are, the guild leader or commander of a World vs. World guild, jumping into it is not going to be like super difficult. In that case, is that a lot of the other guilds you're going to be facing is that you can always find people at your skill level who are just starting out as well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we can probably wrap this up unless anyone has any questions. Final questions, thoughts? Just take a second to look at chat. I should have said something about real stuff. Important step is to give scrappers. Oh yes, venoms is pretty important. So typically you're going to see Basilisk Venom and Devour Scale Venom, whichever one is a mob. Spider Venom, one of those. Look at me not knowing the name of skills.
I think it's Devour.
Yeah. Okay. There's too many venoms. But yeah, the Emote Venom and Basilisk Venom, typically you're going to see used right before the stealth phase happens. So thieves are going to use the venoms and then usually swap back to other skills. But your priority with that is giving the scrappers Basilisk Venom, so that they have an unblockable hit on their reveal, because the reveal baseline is not unblockable. And so you will use the Bassi to make it unblockable and therefore pass through Aegis on the enemy guild. And then obviously, you give a couple other people Bassi. Like again, if you have a warrior going out for reveal, you'd give them Bassi. Potentially, you might give one of the renegades or Necro Bassi, and then you'd give probably like Necros or renegades the emote venom. But it's just a good way to make your single target, your opener, a bit stronger. But yes, very good call out, Bart. Thank you. I will also just say I'm always happy to review footage or answer any questions about GVG. Also, I will say I am not by any means the only person you should listen to for advice or suggestions in GVG. I'm not the end-all be-all. No one is for GVG. Again, it's a community-run thing. It's not like I made the game mode or something. So you shouldn't take my word as law. I would say I'm relatively experienced with GVG. I've been GVGing for a long time at a lot of different levels, but the best thing you can do for yourself is to get out there and play it and learn it for yourself. And I would highly recommend you do so, because I think GVGing is the best thing in this game, especially at a competitive high level. I think it's the most fun part of this game, and leading part of that too. But like I said, if you ever have any questions, happy to answer. If you ever have any footage you want to get looked at, I'm always happy to do it for pretty much any class, or I can certainly point you in the right direction for someone who can do that. But yeah.
Also, if anyone has 100 potions of Ascalonian
All right,
mages,
I'm gonna head out. You
him,
guys have a
or
great
a
rest of your
permanent potion
evening.
of Ascalonian mages.
Hey,
You
Roy.
can find them all the time in Obsidian
Yeah.
Sanctum.
One quick question. Sorry if you already addressed this. I
No
came
worries,
in
man.
late.
Absolutely.
Have you spoken to kind of the expectation and the tempo of comms? Because I know that's usually kind of a very difficult barrier for a lot of people to cross.
I mentioned it very briefly, but not really. So that is a pretty good question. Yeah, comms are obviously really important. The driver is going to be typically the one filling up most of the comms, but having good cooldowns, like I mentioned, coordinating your if you're a necromancer, coordinating your well timers, letting your driver know when your wells are coming back up. If you are someone with a res utility, so Ellie, Chrono, Guardian, communicating when you're using your res utility, potentially on who as well, and listening for other people communicating it, so you can cancel your res utility in time if need be, is really important. You don't want to have people just calling out random stuff. So again, the important cooldowns are probably going to be res utility, obviously whatever the driver's calling, and then if you think you're the single target, if you're getting pressured, if you're going to die, if you specifically need cleanses or stun breaks, it's important to communicate those. If you're about to go downstate, having a location. So like if you're like in the center of the arena and you're going downstate saying, oh, I'm going down in the center, that's helpful because it's easier to get res utility out if you know where the person is. So those kind of key things are really good to communicate, but you don't want to say, you don't want to say literally every skill you're using. You don't want to clutter comms. And like I said as well, better communication is a skill that people can grind out and will separate some guilds from others. Okay.
Just like when you put if you put X in say chat when you go down, and it creates a speech bubble that helps a lot with people using res utilities.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have a downstate message that is helpful as well. All right, I guess that probably does it.
Thank you so much, Roy.
Thanks
All
for
right,
your
of
time, Roy.
course.
Thank you.
Happy to do it. I hope it helped in some small way. Yeah. You all have a lovely rest of your evenings. Happy early 4th of July to everybody, and yeah. Take care.
Bye, Roy.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.